Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is Lital Shemesh, Israel Debrief. I'm Lital Shemesh, breaking down what's really happening in Israel beyond the noise, beyond the headlines. For decades, Judea and Samaria were treated as a temporary problem. Today, we ask whether sovereignty is no longer an ideology, but a reality. I'm here today with Major Doron Spielman, a Jerusalem-based former IDF military spokesman and geopolitical commentator. Doron is a New York Times bestselling author and frequent analyst on global networks, as well as a senior fellow at the Israel Liberty Center. Doron has spent 25 years in Israel in military and geopolitical affairs. As the former VP of the City of David, he transformed the small village into one of the world's most significant archaeology sites, highlighting the bond between the Jewish people and Jerusalem. Doron, hello. It's such a privilege to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Lital.
So let's just dive into the topic, which I think is the most interesting for the Israeli society, because in the recent 2 years, ever since October 7th, I think there's a consensus in Israel against a Palestinian state. We've come to an understanding that we will not see any peace in the upcoming years. Our neighbors don't want to live side by side next to an Israeli state. And now we're asking ourselves, what's next? What's going to be the upcoming of the reality in Israel in the upcoming years?
You know, sovereignty is something that actually I think we need to realize we already have. Israel already has what's called de facto sovereignty. There are two types of sovereignty. One is de jure. It's when the entire international community recognizes your sovereignty. And we may even have that as well if we go back 100 years. But de facto sovereignty is when you are a defined people in a defined land with a defined purpose. And there's probably no other nation in the entire world, Lital, that has found a land that they have more purpose to and more history in than we do. And I think part of what we need to do in the next few years is just to realize, in fact, we are sovereign. No one needs to tell us we're sovereign. And what does that mean? We need to look at Judea and Samaria, and as you mentioned, now is the opportunity, as an integral part of the state of Israel. And there are certain practical steps that we need to take. And if we take them, then we will be convinced that this is sovereign, and then perhaps the world will as well.
So I think in a way, in the recent year or two, when we saw Minister Smotrich, giving an approval for building more and more cities across Judea and Samaria, do you think we came to a conclusion that we don't need the world approval in order to build in Judea and Samaria, in order to actually build in our own country?
I think certainly Minister Smotrich and the Prime Minister Netanyahu, do believe that, and most of Israeli society do. I mean, all we have to do is look in the field. Smotrich approved 69 new communities. If we go back just before the 2000s, there were no communities whatsoever that had been approved, meaning you put up a community, you could have 5,000 people living there, water, electricity, you work in Jerusalem, you work in Tel Aviv, you're in your integral homeland, and you were not considered sovereign in your land. However, today, when we see that he's done this, and there's been very little pushback from the world, and the United States, while they haven't given an explicit approval of sovereignty, they also haven't come down on him. One of the key examples is across from where I live in Ma'ale Adumim, E1. When you said E1 under any previous governments, like the Biden government, the Obama government, they got up and screamed and yelled. Why? That was the integral piece of land that connects Jerusalem to Judea and Samaria. And now we can see the tractors are beginning to roll, and the international community is relatively silent. So I think this is the opening for sovereignty. The door is open, we have to walk through it and change a few things along the way.
Yeah, then again, what is stalling President Trump from giving us a green light, to accomplish all of our aspirations? Is he afraid that it's going to damage the Abraham Accords, that the expansion of the Abraham Accords, in your opinion?
The irony is, I think President Trump does think that it's going to damage the Abraham Accords or a chance for them. In fact, he said it himself. He says, it will not happen. It will not happen. That was his response to Israel's declaration. There was a Knesset vote that was being put forward on sovereignty. And he said, I promised my Arab partners that this would not happen. And this is the key to the Abraham Accords. I have to say, with all due respect to President Trump, and he is the greatest friend Israel has ever had in the White House, I think that he is missing a key component here, which is we're calling this the Abraham Accords because of the Abrahamic tradition.
Amazing, exactly.
And if you open up the Bible, Lital, and you look for Abraham.
By the way, he himself also said it in his speech in the Knesset. Remember, he was talking about Abraham, Avraham. He was trying to pronounce it in Hebrew.
Exactly, and I think that part of our job, Lital, and the job of the people of Israel, and people following, what's happening in Israel, is to explain that if you're talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the only place you're really talking about, you're not talking about Tel Aviv. You're really talking about Judea and Samaria. You're talking about Hebron, Bethlehem, Shechem, Jerusalem, of course, which is in the center of the country. This is where the patriarchs walked, and so therefore, yes, he did say that, but I think Israel needs to push back here and say, look, who are we going to send to the Abraham Accords? Are we going to send people who are talking about Israeli high-tech and the gadgets and cherry tomatoes? Or are we going to send people that say, we are truly the ancestral indigenous people to this land?
Yeah.
I actually think it's the key.
And I think if you ask me, that's exactly, if you're talking about Israeli advocacy, that's exactly where we failed throughout the years. We failed in the mission to explain to the world that we are the indigenous people. Instead of talking about our heritage, the things that you were doing, the amazing work that you were doing in the city of David, showing, the evidence to the fact that we were living here for thousands of years under our nose. The Palestinians just invented an identity, and now maybe it's too late to re-explain to everyone that there is no such thing as a Palestinian people, that it's just Arab tribes who are living here, and now we need to fight over land.
I think you bring up a very important point, which is it may be too late to try to unwind their narrative, but it is not too late to present our narrative, to present the actual truth. And once people have two stories, they can and they do conflict over the same piece of land, then people can make an educated decision. And you're right, when I was in the city of David, and we would pull out of the ground a seal made of clay that has the name on it of somebody that was in Jeremiah the prophet's cabinet, and we see his name in the Bible, that sent shockwaves throughout the world because it shows that we are indigenous and begins to cause the crumbling of their story, which is really when you had massive opposition to the city of David. As soon as it began to be a silver bullet in that narrative of the Palestinians, supposed Palestinians, then the White House, the State Department, the Muslim Brotherhood, all aligned to try to stop those excavations. And I was privileged, I think, to be there during that time.
Yeah, can you speak a little bit about your book, about the revealings, the amazing revealings that you're publishing, and how do we get this book, to be worldwide when we're seeing France and Canada and Australia declaring they're supporting a Palestinian state? Like, how are we getting the truth out there?
So the book, thank God, it's called When the Stones Speak. It became a New York Times bestseller. So in the United States of America, it has begun to really get a lot of feedback. It was translated into Hebrew by Selah Meir, and it's going to be translated into Russian by Selah Meir, and hopefully into German and Spanish. Why did this book meet such an incredible opening? Why is it a New York Times bestseller? Because I think where you began this podcast, after October 7th, people began to realize this is not about borders. This is not about, how big we're going to be in Israel. This is about the existence of the state of Israel. The other side, the Palestinians, Hamas, backed up by international countries who just approve them, such as the UK and Australia, Ireland, and others. They have one simple narrative, which is the Jewish people are colonialists and have no position here.
Yeah, and they're the underdog in their eyes.
They really are. They're the underdog, and we came here to kind of colonize them. Well, when you look in my book, when you look in the city of David and you reach into the ground and you pull out that seal of Jeremiah, or the Pilgrimage Road, which is this incredible road which we've uncovered that goes all the way from a pool at the bottom of the city of David into the temple. And it predates Islam by 600 years, and millions of people are going to walk in that road. Well, then what can they say? And my answer is very simple. You can talk as much politics as you want. All I'm doing here is presenting the science, and the science so clearly undermines that narrative. And so the message is people need to go back to our ancestral roots and realize something really critical. No matter where you go in Israel, you are indigenous. It's not about going to Masada or City of David. It's about going there and understanding this is our indigenous country. And when we believe that, Lital, and that enters our educational system, then every Israeli that goes overseas, that goes on the news, will spread that message
Yeah.
and begin to chip away at that narrative.
And I'm curious to ask you a little bit about the American politics, because you've mentioned this book is a bestseller in America. Just recently, there was a massive delegation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs together with the Museum of Friends of Israel. They brought over 1,000 pastors to Israel to see their amazing support, to see how they truly, their understanding of the fact that the Jews are the indigenous people. But when you dive into what's happening within the Jewish community, things are getting much more complicated. And you, as an American Israeli Jew, how do you explain that?
You know, I think Americans have some skin in the game, but they're very, very afraid. They're operating today under an enormous amount of fear. Maybe not as much as British Jewry, who are in a country that today has an enormous Muslim population that's essentially calling their elections. But as an American Jew today, I have American Jews coming up to me with pride saying, I have my Jewish star here. Look, it's inside my shirt.
Yeah.
Meaning, this is a community that really is feeling like they are under attack. Ironically, the evangelistic community, which is really, they've inherited the true principles of the United States. We have to understand, what is the evangelist community? They're the ones that have taken the founding fathers of the United States, that built that country on the same ideals that we built Israel on. In fact, the Bible was their blueprint, right? Mm-hmm. And Hebrew was almost an official language. They understood, they saw themselves as the Israelis that crossed the wilderness into the promised land. They understand that what binds our two countries is not just that Israel's a great ally, and we are. It's not just that we're democracies, and we are. It's that we share the exact same fundamental biblical roots. And I think the Jewish community, both in the United States and around the world, the secular Jewish community, have allowed those roots to atrophy. And now that they're under attack, they don't have what to hang on to. Mm-hmm. So for them, I put out the book first in English. My first audience was American Jewry. Wake up, know who you are. If you know who you are, then stand strong and actually fight for who you are.
Yeah, you yourself, you made Aliyah, you came to Israel 27 years ago.
Correct.
Without a family, without your parents, without any Orthodox background. What led you to that decision?
You know, it's funny, I have to thank a bunch of anti-Semites on my high school football team that one day during practice, I was at practice and a bunch of pennies and coins fell around my feet, and I bent down to pick one up, and then I realized a bunch of the guys said, hey, Jew, pick up the coins.
Oh my God.
And this began a wave of anti-Semitism directed mostly towards me because I was on the football team and much more visible, along with another 4 Jewish friends that I had. And we had to literally, Lital, fight for our Judaism, like many American Jews hadn't seen. And I saw that latent anti-Semitism. When I came to Israel at the age of 18 on a month trip and I saw Israeli soldiers, I said, wow, I'm not fighting alone. It's the first time I actually felt there's an entire country that's fighting for their Judaism, fighting for their land.
Wow.
And it was a difficult process. I had to say goodbye to my family and almost like a pioneer, come here, entered the army.
You?
I was 26 when I finally made the move. I began when I was 22.
That's incredible.
Yes, I
like
left
a massive decision for such a young age.
It really was, and I have to tell you that I feel like I wasn't alone, like there was something divine here helping me, because after the army, I was introduced to the city of David. And for me, this just fit like a glove, because I was involved in campus activism, and I understood, like you as well, the importance of advocacy. And when I saw the city of David, I realized, wait a second, this cuts through everything. If we can just allow people to see the evidence without even politics getting involved in the way, maybe we can grow this. And I was lucky to join Davidala, who founded the project, Davidala Berry, and to be witness to it growing into this incredible site. And I think that's the paradigm. It's the paradigm for Israel. It's also the paradigm for Judea and Samaria. When we talk about Judea and Samaria, it has got to be understood that this is the biblical heartland. And I've heard you use that phrase before in Hebrew.
Yeah.
And that's really what it is.
Can I ask you a personal question and try and understand what brings an American Jew to Israel without any Orthodox background? Like, what made you even closer to Judaism and to become an Orthodox?
You know, it first started with the Israeli people. I saw a people here who are made of different stuff. I have to be honest, and I love my friends and my family in the United States. Israelis are the true Jew, and I felt this. I thought, wow, these people aren't in the ghetto. These people are standing strong. They're waving flags. They're charging to the battleground. And that ignited in me a sense of real pride. And that's where it began. After I came into this area and I began walking the land, and I saw people, I met religious people who were walking the land with the Bible. I said, well, let me see what that says. And the more I read it and understood this tradition that we have, I realized that the state of Israel, why are we back here? It's not just because we have a great army. We're back here because God has brought us back here after 2,000 years. And that caused me to really bring the tradition in. And when I met my beautiful wife, Sarah, who has a large Israeli background, we just decided to build a family based on that tradition. And thank God our children are strong fighters and very strong in the tradition.
Incredible story. Do you think we'll see this awakeness in the American community, in the Australian community in the upcoming year?
I do, and I think we already have. I think that people define the post-October 7th Jew. And what is the post-October 7th Jew? There are two types of Jews now in America and Australia, and you know better than I because you weathered that terror attack in Australia, which I didn't. But there are two types of Jews. There are those who decide to put their heads down, bury their heads under the ground and disappear. But there's a line in the ground today. You can either do that, or you can stand up and be a proud Jew. And the ones who are standing up and being proud Jews are learning more about their faith. Because that's, at the end of the day, why else would you stay Jewish? If it's cultural, you could have lox and bagels and be a non-Jew. Yeah. But if to be a Jew means you have this incrediedible inheritance.
Unfortunately, by the way, most of them, according to recent surveys, also in Australia and in America, are in intermarriage relationships, and unfortunately, most of them won't be Jewish.
Many of them won't be, but you know what, Lital? And the tragedy of October 7th brought this to the light. In my own family, I can say this, they were dissipating without anyone stopping them or putting a line in the ground. What October 7th really did was say you have to make a choice. Your children are looking at you. How will you respond to this? Are we Jews that are disappearing, or are we Jews that are standing tall? And I believe that there will be those who will answer the choice, not the majority. Like there was never the majority in Israel, right? We know that. The majority of Jews didn't leave Egypt. The majority of Jews didn't come back to Israel from Persia. But that core people will be the ones who will join us and will build this country.
Yeah, and if we're going back to the sovereignty topic, in a way, the world is almost obsessed with what's happening in Israel, with what's happening in Judea and Samaria. Every day you're opening the New York Times, the Washington Post. Even before October 7th, you most likely would find an item about Israel. How do you explain this international media obsession on Israel, and how do we fight it?
Well, they wrote a book around 40 years ago during the Oslo Accords, which basically the book said, Israel has a problem with these people called the Palestinians, divide the land and everybody will live happily.
Yeah.
And now that entire book is basically disintegrating in front of their eyes, and therefore they're fighting for it. And the core place that it's disintegrating is Judea and Samaria. Because when they see finally Israel standing up and saying, I'm sorry, this is actually our biblical land. Not only is it our biblical land, we were attacked. We didn't even start with this land, and it became our land. We were attacked in 48, attacked in 67, attacked in 73, and we received this territory by legal and military and historical means. Once we stand up and say that, it's all we had to do all that time ago. It basically dissipates this entire Palestinian narrative, which is no different from an ISIS narrative or a narrative that's carrying out terror attacks in Australia or anywhere else. It is built on the destruction of Israel and the murdering of Jews. I mean, all you have to do is look at their central constitution. And now that they see that we are finally taking a stand, they're saying, wait a second, that entire theory, if Israel's not on board, it's not going to happen. And this is the moment, I think, you asked me what we need to do. We need to lean into this, Lital, with all of our might. We need to speak about Judea and Samaria the same way we speak about Tel Aviv. It needs to be taught in our schools. We need to move the military out of Judea and Samaria, moving the police in Judea and Samaria. When I want to build a balcony on my home, I don't want to go to some military governance. I want to go to the Israeli government. We have got to have complete de facto. Whether we need to announce sovereignty, let's just be sovereign.
Yeah, I also think that in a way, and you know, every single day, almost every single day in Israel, you hear stories about how the IDF has confiscated, terror facilities, weapons, arrested someone in Jenin, a terror cell in Jenin. These stories don't come out to the international media. Israel is not publicizing it enough. Also, us, in a way, as Israelis, we're getting used to live in constant terror. We're getting used to live next to a Palestinian entity who's funding terrorists, who is paying the terrorists, who is the entire Palestinian culture glorifying terrorists, and in a way, it doesn't come out to the world. I think if the world would hear about what is happening here, and if Israel would do enough to publicize the day-to-day life, of terror, living next to a terror entity, the situation will be much, much better.
I agree with you. And even last night, we could see there were 20 illegal Arabs that infiltrated into Israel near the Turkmenia checkpoint. Now, that just sounds like another checkpoint. It is 1 mile from a community called Telem of 540 Jews who were sleeping when they came in. Just like Be'eri, just like all the other communities down south, had they been carrying guns and hatchets, we would have had another October 7th on our hands. And that was just one incident from last night. It's barely in the Israeli news, and I'm sure it's not covered in the international news. I agree with you. We have gotten used to compartmentalizing this problem. We have got to present this to the United States government. The United States government has got to understand this, first of all. The international media has to understand Judea and Samaria is the buffer zone to protect Israel from another October 7th to make sure it never takes place. Just like in the United States, you have people living on border communities that prevent, if Mexico would decide to go to war with America, well, America is a big territory. We have no territory.
Well, exactly. That also the size. People have no idea that Israel is basically in the size of New Jersey. That's how close we live to, to Ramallah and to Jenin and to Bethlehem. Like everything is half an hour drive here and there.
I think, Lital, we need to build, going back to both combining the military threat and our ancestral roots. This is part of what Smotrich is doing, along with Prime Minister's approvals, really building infrastructure in Judea and Samaria. Because when those tour buses come to Israel, they need to be driving from Beersheba in the south up to Hebron on a large road in which they see two things. They see, wow, this is the way of the patriarchs and the matriarchs. This is in Judea and Samaria. And number two, they realize that they're on a mountain ridge. And just over that ridge is a valley that goes down into Jordan, which is where 90% of all of the weapons that are being smuggled into the Palestinians come through. And the only thing standing before that weapon smuggling, which can begin in Iran, Iraq, and go all the way through, the only thing that's standing in the way are the ranches and the communities that are in Judea and Samaria. These people are our heroes, and we have got to really represent this and bring people to these locations. When they see it, they'll believe it.
Yeah, not only they're heroes, they're pioneers. And also we were talking about what the international media is doing to them is also the obsession of every time an event is occurring, you only hear what the settlers has been doing to the Palestinians. You don't hear what happened before, what threatened them before, like such a bad reputation around what truly is Zionism.
It really is. And I think if you were to take anyone here and not tell them where they are, not tell them you're in Israel, plop them down on one of these farms, they would see people that are grazing cattle, people that are environmentally friendly and are growing crops, young people that love their land and are shepherding their land. And they would say, wow, this must be Sweden. They wouldn't realize it's Israel. But what happens is there's a very small part of that community which do not follow the law. And it's important to say that, but it's minuscule, just like in any community. 99% of that community are farmers and are ranchers that believe in the state of Israel. They're on state land. And because they have managed to create these incredible farms and reclaim a lot of land that was being illegally usurped upon by Palestinians, well, the international community says, wait a second. This Zionist enterprise is a way for Israel to have greater sovereignty over the land. We have to stop it. How do they stop it? They take every single farm and they say, oh, that's the Hilltop Youth. They're shooting at Palestinians are doing this, and it just doesn't check out. It's just a magnifying glass that blows us up to the international community. And I think that we have to do a much better job. I'm so glad you're asking me this.
Yeah.
That we have to do a much better job of saying, no, these are the pioneers, like you said. These are young people with values, religious values, by the way, that resonate with a lot of Americans, families that are raised very healthy on the land, environmentally friendly. And we have got to present this as really, they should be getting the Israel Prize, not condemnation.
Then again, you walk around campuses in America, not speaking about, the recent 2 years and the demonstrations and the support in Hamas, but throughout the recent 2 decades, March, April, you have what they called Israeli Apartheid Week around campuses where people are literally, handing out leaflets, spreading lies on how Israel is an apartheid state, Also in South Africa. South Africa, I think it was the worst I've seen around the campuses. But how do we fight that lie?
First of all, I think the optics have to be battled. The other side, the quote unquote Palestinian side, has been working this for 70 years while we were kind of asleep at the wheel. We kind of said, no, that really won't. They just showed picture after picture after picture, many of them doctored. And if it happened once, they showed it 10,000 times and they created a reality which isn't true. You and I both been to hospitals for good reasons, hopefully. And who do you see in the hospitals? Israeli Arabs. Who are the doctors today? Israeli Arabs. You walk into the Supreme Court, you have an Israeli Arab justice. I mean, it just doesn't hold water. But Israel has been focused again and again on our military strength, which we have military strength, and not going down to the core. And I'll tell you, as a military
the basic fact, you know, of you have more Arabs living in Jaffa than you have Jews living in the entire Arab world, you know?
Exactly. And this is not said, Lital. And, you know, I'll speak about myself. As a military spokesman for the last 27 years and in the most recent war, it was very important to explain, yes, tactically, why we didn't try to kill civilians and why we have great weaponry. But the other side has one answer that they say. They say, okay, but you stole our land. And if we cannot answer that core question in every single interview, this is our ancestral land. You want to think it's yours, do whatever you want, but it is definitely mine. If we cannot answer that, then kids in university, what do they see? They see a mighty power that's very sophisticated against this small little David, and we're the Goliath, and we've stolen David's land. And for decades, including myself in the military, we did not bring up these points, and I think this is a fundamental shift. We're great at telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt. We've learned how to tell that story, but we do not know how to tell the story of the justice of our return to the land of Israel and to many people who are already living here. And we have to learn to tell our own story, tell it with bravery and courage, not be embarrassed by it. Tell it every single place. Our ambassadors need to learn it. Our students need to be learned it. American kids need to learn it, Australia, South Africa. And then we need to lean into it, and hopefully it will actually take place.
Yeah, amazing. And hopefully we'll gain more and more followers and people to listen to this podcast and actually understanding what is happening in Israel. Doron Spielman, I want to thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you, Lital. It's an honor.
This is the Israel Debrief. See you next time.